You know, when we think of modern conflict, we picture missiles, we picture drones. But what happens when the battlefield itself is, well, the internet? That's what we're digging into today. The invisible, escalating cyber war being fought right now between the US, Israel, and Iran. The largest cyber attack in history. I mean, that is a massive claim, but that's exactly how some reports were describing the digital side of this recent military conflict. And it's just as powerful reminder that today, a physical attack and a cyber attack, they're often two sides of the very same coin. And that really is the heart of what we're talking about here, a war on two fronts. This wasn't just about what you could see on satellite images or in news reports. It was also an invisible battle, fought in silence across global networks. So every war has a spark, right? And in this case, it was a kinetic one, a very real physical one. On February 28th, the US and Israel launched these big, coordinated airstrikes against Iran. And we're not talking about random targets. They were going after key military sites and, crucially, they killed high-level officials, including the supreme leader himself. As you'd expect, Iran's response was just as physical and just as fast. A massive barrage of missiles and drones aimed right back at US and Israeli targets. But here's the thing. Almost instantly, the fight went digital. This wasn't some slow burn. It was an immediate, massive wave of cyber operations from all sides. The internet literally became the second battlefield in a matter of hours. Okay, so let's break down the action here. First up, let's look at the coordinated cyber assault that was launched by US and Israeli forces against Iran. And these targets were not random at all. They were chosen with surgical precision. The number one goal? Cripple the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' ability to coordinate a response by hitting their command and control systems. But it went so much deeper than that. They targeted communications, news websites, even everyday local apps people use. The objective was pretty clear: create maximum disruption, maximum chaos. Now, one of the main weapons they used was something called a DDoS attack. The easiest way to think about it is like this. Imagine 1,000 people all trying to cram through a single doorway at the exact same time. It's just chaos, right? The system gets totally overwhelmed with junk traffic, and nobody who actually needs to get through can. It's basically a brute force way to just knock a website completely offline. But what's really fascinating here is how this whole thing went beyond just technical attacks and moved into psychological tactics. Pro-West hackers reportedly hijacked a popular prayer app inside Iran and sent out this push notification to its users: "Help has arrived." I mean, that's an incredible example of using everyday tech to get a message straight into the hands of citizens. And what was the real-world impact? Well, it was huge. The Internet Observatory NetBlocks reported a massive, widespread internet blackout across Iran that lasted for more than 48 hours. This effectively cut off huge parts of the country from the digital world entirely. Of course, this was far from a one-sided fight. So now let's flip the script and look at Iran's response. Cybersecurity company Flashpoint reported that Iranian and pro-Iran groups launched their own counteroffensive, and they gave it a pretty dramatic name: the Great Epic Campaign. And Iran's response wasn't just one big attack. It was this coordinated effort from a whole coalition of different hacking groups, and each one had its own specialty. You had the Handala group, for example, going after actual physical infrastructure, industrial control systems in Israel, fuel infrastructure in Jordan. Then you had the Cyber Islamic Resistance, who were targeting military logistics with that DDoS method we talked about, but also with data wiping attacks. And then there was the Fatih Mignon electronic team, which aimed its most destructive stuff at Western financial and energy companies. And that brings us to another really important term here: wiper malware. So unlike a DDoS attack, which just disrupts a service, a wiper is purely destructive. Its only job is to get inside a system and just erase everything. It's the digital equivalent of burning the place to the ground. Pure sabotage. And according to experts like Adam Myers over at CrowdStrike, these initial attacks, they were probably just the opening act. As he says, these kinds of operations are often just the first wave. They're designed to test defenses and basically prepare the ground for something much, much more aggressive to come. And this is where Iran's elite hacking units come into play. They're known as Advanced Persistent Threat Groups, or APTs. You can think of them as highly skilled, state-sponsored cyber teams. Security firms started warning that several of these groups, with wild code names like Muddy Water and Peach Sandstorm, were being activated and retooling. But what's maybe even more worrying is the silence from Iran's top espionage group, APT-34. Experts don't think they're on vacation. They believe this quiet suggests they are covertly getting into position for a future attack. So all of this sounds incredibly intense, right? But it brings up a huge problem that you see in any conflict like this: the fog of war. And in the digital world, it can be even harder to separate the hard facts from all the propaganda and exaggeration. Which leads us to the big question: how much of all the reported damage and all the disruption actually happened? I mean, think about it. Trying to verify claims from anonymous hacking groups or from nations that are actively fighting an information war, it's just incredibly difficult. And look, sources are pretty clear that both sides have a history of, let's say, inflating their successes. Hacking groups aligned with Iran are notorious for overstating what they can do. But at the same time, reports from the West detailing the impact of their own cyber attacks during these escalations, they can also be prone to exaggeration for strategic messaging. And you can see this in the early assessments from cybersecurity firms. SentinelOne, for instance, put out a report right after the conflict kicked off, saying it had not attributed significant malicious cyber activity that could be directly verified. Now, that doesn't mean nothing happened, but it really highlights the huge gap between the claims being made and the hard, verifiable evidence. So here's the bottom line, the really crucial point. While we should definitely be skeptical about specific claims flying around, we absolutely cannot ignore the bigger picture. The demonstrated capability of all of these groups to launch sophisticated, disruptive attacks is very, very real. That is the genuine threat, and it's constantly evolving. And that brings us to the aftermath. What does this massive escalation actually mean for the rest of us? Well, experts have issued a pretty clear warning, especially for Western nations. As the security firm Anomaly put it so bluntly, this is not a theoretical scenario. They've confirmed that Iran-backed groups are actively escalating their operations right now. The threat of retaliation isn't over. It's ongoing. So, who should be the most worried? Well, experts have a pretty clear list of high-risk sectors. We're talking about government agencies, defense contractors, financial services, and healthcare. But also, and maybe most importantly, the critical infrastructure we all rely on every single day, things like energy and water. These are the industries now being told to brace for impact. And it's not just the targets that are a concern, it's the tactics. Experts say Iran's cyber playbook is getting more aggressive, and it's constantly evolving. They're now using destructive ransomware a lot more. That's the malware that locks up all of a system's data and demands a huge payment. And this tactic really blurs the line between a state-sponsored attack and just old-fashioned criminal extortion, which makes it even harder to figure out who's really behind it all. All of this leaves us with a final and pretty sobering thought. In a world where a missile strike can happen at the same time as an attack on a power grid or a bank or even a hospital, those old lines between the battlefield and civilian life, they're getting blurrier by the day. And it really forces us all to ask, in this new era of hybrid warfare, is any network, anywhere, truly safe?